Thank everyone for being here. I know some folks are still fighting a little bit of traffic issues this morning, and so we may have a couple folks coming in late. But I want to thank everyone that is here. Appreciate the members. This is the Commission on Medical Cannabis, our third meeting. Just to remind all of our members of the Commission what our mission is. The mission of the Commission is to establish a comprehensive recommendation regarding the potential regulation of medical cannabis in this state and to provide a detailed report no later than December 31st to the governor and the legislature. And that is our charge. That is what we're intending to do. Just a couple of house cleaning issues. I believe we're looking at scheduling our next meeting on Wednesday, October 28th, which will be focused on law enforcement concerns. We'll send out a notice to all the members of the committee just confirming that date, but that's what we're looking at. And then hopefully looking at probably a final meeting on December the 1st is what we're looking at this point. And again, we'll confirm all of that as well too. Let me just go through real quick and introduce the members, just kind of make sure we know who's here. Brian Rickman, who's District Attorney, Mountain Judicial Circuit, is here. Dr. Cynthia Wetmore, oncologist at Children's Hospital. I know always, is that Children's Hospital? That's, yeah, okay. Dr. Young Park, GRU, is here. Dr. Mark Murphy is not here. I don't know if he sent someone in his place. Okay. Dr. Mandy Reese, Vice President, Department of Pharmacy Practice up in Gainesville. Chief Stacy Cotton from Covington is here with us. Sheriff Gary Gulich from Paulding County. Gullidge, yeah, sorry about that. My bad. I'm sure you've been called worse. And Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald could not be here. I don't know if she's got somebody here. Let's see. Is Blake here now? Yeah, Blake's, or Sean's here. Okay. Vernon Keenan, GBI director. I saw him. Here he is. Yep. Rick Allen, who's director of Georgia Drugs and Narcotics Agency. Gary Black, our agriculture commissioner. Dr. Alice House with the Mercer Medical School in Columbus. Glad to have you here. I know. Sorry, we're going to get your name tag here right here soon, eventually. So, Ryan Teague with Governor Deal's Executive Council, and Senator Renee Underman is here with me as well too. Butch Miller and Katie Dempsey, House and Senate member, were not able to be here today. So today we're gonna focus on some input from the medical community. But before we do, we have a couple of folks that are here today. One special introduction, and then we're going to have testimony from a couple that I think are relevant to the commission. We're here today because of HB1, which is called Haley's Hope Act, and we're excited today to actually have Haley here today, little Haley Cox, who is just, her and her mom Janaea have just moved back from Colorado for good this week. And so, Janaea, why don't you stand up and let everybody say hey, and we're glad to have you here. Well, that's not Haley, but that's Haley's back there. There she is. Yeah, they had planned on coming home this summer, and they hit a few bumps along the way, but are finally here. So we're glad to have you back on Georgia soil and home for good. And look forward to eating. That's, yeah, go Dogs. And we look forward to having you eat at Cheddar's a lot now that you're back home. So we're glad to have you here. We do have some other family members that have been involved in this effort over the last year. We're glad to have you all here as well too. And other folks, we're glad to have you here. There will be no public testimony today. This is invited guests only for this commission meeting. But I think we'll gain a lot of knowledge from the folks that are here today. We do have a special couple here that we want to start with. Sullivan and Ruth Cheney are here today. If you guys don't mind, would you come on up to the podium now? I'm going to let them share most of their story, but I got to know Sullivan and Ruth over the last several weeks. And to the members of this commission, we're hearing a lot of testimony. Those two seats right there, Ms. Cheney, would be great. we're hearing a lot of testimony from experts in the medical field and the medical marijuana field and the law enforcement field, in the political arena. But at the end of the day, this is an issue that touches individual lives, and the quality of life that these Georgia citizens are attempting to have and improve. And as I heard Ruth's story, she shared it with me, I thought it may be relevant for this committee to remember that the decisions that we're making will affect everyday Georgia citizens. And it's why this issue is so important that we come up with a good solution. So, Ruth and Sullivan, thank you for being here today. And what I'd like to do is just give you 5 or 10 minutes to kind of share your story of what happened to you guys and why. And then we may have a couple of questions afterwards, if that's okay with you. If you'll, hey Brent, are you Brent here? If you'll hit that button, Mr. Cheney, and just make sure I think it's on and test it, and if you'll bring that up when you give your testimony, you could begin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Feel a little uncomfortable in front of all the Justice Department here for what has happened to us and what we've been through. I need to give a little history. I went in the Air Force.
If you'll speak up to the microphone a little bit, or just pull it to you, that'd be good.
Okay. I went in the Air Force in 1974 as a pharmacy technician. I was enlisted and worked in a couple of pharmacies. I was in Alaska and I met Ruth, and we were married in 1979. She was a dental assistant. And then my next assignment, I went to the School of Healthcare Science at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas, for the pharmacy school, to teach in the pharmacy school. There I got a degree at night and was able to get commissioned in the Air Force and became an Air Force pilot. And I stayed there for 20 years, a little over. And Ruth became pregnant with our first child, and she was able to get out. So that kind of gives you a background of where we were. And then when I retired, I wound up working for ASA Airlines, and then I worked for Delta for about 12 years. We've never been in trouble. We've never had any more than a traffic citation, I guess you'd say, speeding ticket. Then, we were living happily. We've been married almost 36 years and moved up to the mountains. We lived down in middle Georgia, moved up to the mountains. And she had fallen a couple of times, and she started getting some numbness in her left hand and her 2 middle fingers. And talked to our family practice. It started moving up her arm and on her left side. She was put on various medications for the pain because she was having quite a bit of pain. And she's been on oxycodone and methadone and hydrocodone, all these narcotics to try to help with her pain during these things. Went to various doctors. She's been to a pain management doctor. She's had facet injections. She's had MRIs. She was tested for, she went to a neurologist, a neurosurgeon because of her neck. Her neck, they said, was really okay. Went to a neurologist. They tested her for every disease that you can think of under the sun. If you ever watch any medical programs and all the weird diseases that they call out, Sjogren's and sarcoidosis and lupus and on, even Lyme disease. They tested her for it, nothing there. Her MRI, so the way we got started on that, I took her finally to the Shepherd Center, and they did the doctor there did a quick examination and said she had classic symptoms of multiple sclerosis. So that's where we started going to the neurologist neurosurgeon first, and then he sent us to a neurologist. One of our appointments at the neurologist, we picked up one of the multiple sclerosis magazines, and it had a large article in there about marijuana helping multiple sclerosis, which we had never really messed with. We'd been around, of course, but never messed with. And this was going on. She was waiting for her medication to come to be, I guess, legalized. It was a new oral medication instead of going on interferon treatments, and injections, and IVs, and all that. She has had solumedrol IVs, facet injections in her neck, all kinds of things. But we read this article one time when we went to the neurologist, and he did MRIs of her brain, said she didn't have the white spots typical of multiple sclerosis, but as he ran through everything else and ruled everything else, he determined that she had multiple sclerosis. Once we found this article, we read about it, thought about it, but we kept her on the regime that the doctor was keeping her on, hydrocodone and just more or less pain management. But one night we were sitting and watching TV. It took about 4 years to find out she had MS. One night we were watching TV, and all of a sudden her hands just started to curl up. Her toes started curling up, and she scared me. Couldn't turn her neck. She couldn't hardly move in a lot of places. She was staying in bed a lot. And at one time she stayed in bed for 36 hours straight, and I was scared. I was worried about her. But this one night when everything started curling up, remember the marijuana thing, and I basically panicked, and I went out and I found a marijuana cigarette and brought it home. And since we'd been around it, she knew that the smoke would give her a headache. So I actually mixed it up in a tea that she likes to drink. Got it real hot. Being in pharmacy, I know a little bit about how some things are, and I know it's an oil-based type. THC is an oil-based. So I got as hot as I could. She drank that, and I'd say, what would you say, an hour? 2 hours. 2 hours. Everything started to relax, and she felt a whole lot better, and a lot of the pain went away. So we thought, okay, that'll be a remedy. We knew it was illegal, but managed to find somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody, kind of a deal, and find an ounce. And I would clean it up for her. And my pharmacy background, instead of her just trying to smoke it or just eat it, I tried to do something probably most people don't try to do. And I actually took, I feel like I'm pretty good at making fudge. And it takes a long time. It takes me about 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours to actually cook the fudge. And it brings the temperature up very, very slowly in the heat. And the prolonged heat, I knew, would release more of the oils from the THC. And that's all we really knew. And didn't know that much about CBD at the time. That's the reason I made the fudge. I weighed it out, and I checked my pan, and I got about 50 squares, 1 inch, basically 1 inch cubes I could cut out of it. And I had everything set up where I could cut it into 50 cubes. I weighed out 5 grams. Which would give each piece about 100 milligrams of marijuana, so that it was more, I guess you'd say, hopefully the doctor would agree with me, a little more clinical, a little more controlled on what happened. And she would eat a piece of that. She would not get high. She would not feel the effects of the marijuana, but it relieved her symptoms. So we started doing that for a while. And then last year, she grows a garden every year, and I do that. Since she got MS, I've been trying to set up things. I built her a greenhouse to keep her busy, to try to keep her moving so that she doesn't start, I guess, losing mobility. And just doing different things like that. So I put in a garden for her every year. I plow it up, I till it up, I lay the rows out and everything, and she's the one that plants it. And out of the marijuana that we had bought, of course there's always stems and seeds, and she saved some seeds. And last year she decided that she would plant some seeds along the same road that she had her okra, and it was, you couldn't see it from the road. Neighbors didn't know we had it. Nobody really knew we had it except for people invited to our house. And last July, we were woken about 9 or 10 in the morning. There was a helicopter overhead. The DEA Drug Task Force of Georgia was there, the Sheriff's Department, and I think there was one other agency there that descended upon us. They had the helicopter, they had trucks with four-wheelers. I mean, like we were some kind of top criminal murderers. You know, we didn't know what to expect, and we were just scared to death. The DEA agent was very considerate when we explained to him what we were doing. And I think he really understood and sympathized, and rather than arrest her then, he said he'd wait and call her and tell her when to give herself up. And he called her about a month later, and we went directly to the jail, and she gave herself up. Well, we sat on this, worrying about it, wondering what was going to happen, what we would lose. But I wasn't too worried because she was the only one arrested at the time. About 30 days before our indictment proceedings, we both received letters. She received one that says she was indicted and had to be in court on the 27th of August. And I received two letters. One said that since I was the bondholder, we did a property bond, that I had to be there for the bondholder. And then I opened my other letter, and I was just shocked because I was also indicted. And then we started finding out at that point, I was panicking. We couldn't get a hold of her lawyer. She'd already hired a lawyer. And I was panicking trying to find a lawyer. Come to find out, we could lose everything we had, our home, and even possibly lose our income, which was quite a strain on us for a year, and especially that last month. If anybody doesn't think that that's punishment, I would like to say for us it was a great deal of stress for over a year, and then especially the last 30 days, a great deal of stress. Didn't know what was going to happen, if I was going to go to jail and she was going to go to jail. I knew I was going to do everything I could to keep her out of jail. We showed up for our hearing, our indictment and the arraignment, and they sent us to a courtroom, which they said they had changed, and they announced it 3 times. We never heard it. We were in the wrong courtroom. And then our lawyer came in and said thought he had some good news for us, that we'd like it, and he took us outside to meet the Honorable Allison Sussaby, District Attorney for the Appalachian Judicial District. And also we met Morris Martin, Assistant DA. And of course we were both shaken at that time and wondering what was going to happen. And she asked us a couple of questions, and she understood that we'd been in the military, and she said they decided to drop all charges against us, and we were just kind of in shock. This was not done to get high. It was not done for nefarious reasons, or necessarily, we know it was illegal, but we didn't want to have to deal with the criminal element out there trying to buy some marijuana from somebody an ounce at a time. And I know that quite often there are people that will put other stuff in there that's even worse for you. So she had decided to try to grow her own so that she would know exactly what went into it, exactly where it came from, and exactly what we had. They reported they found 13 plants. We were shocked at how fast it grew. It got to be about 6 or 7 feet tall. And I mean, this was in about a month's time, so I guess we have a pretty good garden. But,
good soil up there in Blue Ridge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've been
right, Commissioner?
Quite a few years.
Chicken litter.
And chicken litter and you name it, put in there. And it really didn't take long. But there were no flowers, no buds, nothing on them. They were just plants.
And so, Mr. Cheney, at this point then, so just kind of want to wrap up your story, DA did drop the charges based on what? If you just kind of walk us through
My
what she communicated to you.
understanding, she got a crash course in multiple sclerosis and what it does. and it was helping my wife a great deal. It eased her pain. She was able to actually sleep better. She was able to move better. When she was on the oxycodone and methadone and all the narcotics, she kind of turned into half of a zombie, just sitting there staring half the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those nights when she started curling up that's what scared me.
And so for a period of time you were using cannabis for medicinal purposes and then arrested, and then for a period of time you did not, I guess, obvious as you were under the indictment or potential indictment. Is that correct? And then the DA basically said as long as you sign up for the medical cannabis or the low THC oil registry, that was part of the condition of the charges being dropped. Is that correct too?
Well, we knew the law had just passed, and I looked on the computer to try to find out how to do it, and all I wound up was getting a phone number, had my wife call the phone number somewhere here in the Capitol, the health department, Health and Human Services, and they told her they wouldn't know what to do until a committee met in December. And we're just kind of going, well, what do we do? And we talked to our lawyer a little bit about it, and then my niece down in Macon found out how to do it. So as soon as we found out what she needed to do, we went directly to our family physician, Dr. Dylan Miller. He's a fantastic doctor, probably the best doctor I've ever known, and I've known quite a few through the years, and she's known too. And he found out he had to get registered to be able to write the prescription in order to get her a card, and she was the first one that he put in of his patients for the medical marijuana card. And
so currently you do have the medical register.
We got that.
Registered. Mm-hmm.
We got that a couple of weeks maybe before the indictment, before the arraignment, and she had that already. We did that kind of on our own, but I think the Honorable Sosebee knew that we had that card, and it was actually the first one our lawyer had ever seen. When we took it, we picked it up that day and went to see him the same day and showed it to him.
Right. And so the challenge for you now that you're not in jail, not going to jail, thanks to some pretty wise direction from the district attorney there, and is that now now what? Now where do we access it? How do we get it? It's proven to work, and you don't have a source basically here in Georgia to obtain it. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Right.
You can't cross state lines with it, so
Right. Okay.
it's pretty much up to you guys.
Yeah.
To get it approved.
The members of the committee, if there are any folks who have a question, remember if you'll press your button too, so I know that you have a question. That'll help me. If you are up for answering a couple of questions, you're up for a few more minutes. Okay. Okay.
We don't go to jail.
Well, you got a DA about to ask you a question, so get ready. Mr. Rickman, you want to have a question?
Thank you for being here. I knew that you said it was a DEA agent, but I think, am I not correct? And a lot of us, that happens a lot. We use the terms interchangeably, but it was actually a local task force agent, wasn't it?
It was, I think, the governor's DEA task force out of Jasper, Georgia.
There were no federal agents involved, I guess is what I'm getting
Not
at.
that I know of.
Okay.
But I know the sheriff's department was there, and his card said that he was from DEA, state DEA. And I heard there was one other agency there. I don't know if there's a Fannin County drug committee or whatever. All I know is the day's kind of a blur. The day is kind of scary. The day is, you just don't know what to do. And the only thing we need to do is tell the truth.
Understood. You all were not, and if I understood right at least, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not minimizing your situation, but you were never handcuffed at your house or placed into a patrol car or anything like that?
No, sir. I think he really understood what we were trying to do, and he asked to look in the house. And actually, he said, "Can I come in the house?" We said, "Sure, come on." Invited him in the first time. He said, "No, I got to wait." And then he said, can I come in the house? He said, either you can let me in or I can get a warrant. I said, there's no problem, you can come in. He said, I mainly want to see the greenhouse, which is just, what, 8 feet by 16 feet, something like that. It's just something small for her to piddle with their flowers. And so I took him through the house, and I showed him pretty much every room of the house, the back rooms, the closed rooms, you know, just to show him there was nothing being hidden anywhere. And then took him out to the greenhouse, and he seemed satisfied. His name was Matthew Gray. And he was very polite. I would say he is a super good agent. And he was really understanding, really pleasant. We knew he had a job to do. We knew they all had a job to do. It was nothing personal. We never held anything personal against anybody because we knew we were doing wrong, so the only thing we could do is tell the truth.
Well, and it sounds like, and again, I want to be very careful and not minimize what you've been through in any way, shape, or form, but aside from the fact that the law was there and it was illegal, at least what I'm happy about is it sounds like Georgia, not federal, but Georgia law enforcement and Georgia prosecutors used a lot of common sense and treated you guys with dignity. That's
Yes, sir. We thanked our attorney, and we thanked Honorable Sosebee the same way. We personally went to see her to thank her. We'd written her a thank you note, and we wanted to make sure that she got it, and only she got what we had to say without it being opened by somebody else to interfere and to misconstrue, because I feel like she used a lot of common sense. I felt like she actually thought for herself. And all the people we dealt with, I felt like Matthew Gray, our attorney, Allison Sosebee, all were very understanding and with a lot of grace and a lot of dignity. They had their job to do, but at the same time, we knew we were wrong. And we thank them all for using good common sense and using their own heads, their own thinking, rather than being pushed one way or the other by political or social reasons.
Okay.
And I think that's very fair to say.
great to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions from the members of the committee? Mr. and Ms. Cheney, thank you for being here. I know it was an effort to get up and come down from Blue Ridge, but so we thank you for being here. You know, the members of the committee, again, you know, I think you can see here is two veterans, one who gave his almost entire career to working for protecting us, everyday citizens who salt of the earth folks from every indication, you know, who now properly have a low THC oil registry card, but still face the challenge of how do they access it? How do they get it here without violating federal law? And I think it just emphasizes the point of why this work of what we're doing of coming up with a solution is so important. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of Ruth Cheneys in Georgia, and who are looking to us to make a smart, common sense, wise decision. So, thank you, Mr. and Ms. Cheney. We appreciate you being here, and all the best to you, and as you continue to deal with a tough issue too, as well.
Thank you for having us, and I would just like to say that if you ever want us back again, or anybody wants to really talk to us, we would be happy to talk to them. I mean, we haven't tried to hide anything, I don't believe, and we're willing to cooperate any way we can. We're both in our 60s, so, you know, we're not out having a good time, and we don't even drink anymore. Our life is being retired and staying at home and keeping up with projects around the house. So we're more than happy to help you or anybody else for to help further this cause and for Haley and those like her.
Well, you've been very helpful this morning. Thank you for coming very much. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into the medical testimony this morning. Dr. Park, you ready to go? And Dr. Young Park, who is at the forefront of providing relief for a lot of our families here in Georgia through a clinical trial at Georgia Regents University with a drug called Epidiolex, is doing some really, really good work in the university system at GRU. He's got a presentation for us this morning. And so, Dr. Park, I'll turn it over to you and make sure we have you mic'd up there, ready to go. And if you will, just make sure you speak into the microphone so we can make sure we hear you good. And
good morning.
It's all yours.
All right. My background is the pediatric neurologist training in the Montefiore in the New York neurology training, and then move on to the Duke Medical Center for the epilepsy training. And then since '91, I'm practicing the Medical College of Georgia, Augusta, as a director of a pediatric epilepsy program, and now as a director in the GRU epilepsy program. Today I'm going to share with you to what we know the scientific background in terms of the CBD and the THC medical marijuana. As you know, is our law passing the 8 conditions of a disease in the as listed in the top. However, interesting is among the 8 is 5 disease conditions belong to the neurologic conditions. Number 1, ALS, severe degree and the stages. And next is a seizure disorder, intractable epilepsy. And then following is what you heard from testimony, Mrs. Cheney, was a multiple sclerosis. And then next one is a mitochondrial disease, which is a similarity, but is a lot of neurodegenerative disease and progressive nervous system disease and mitochondrial disease. And then lastly is a Parkinson's disease, as a severe degree end stages, not the beginning of Parkinson's disease. Those 5 conditions we allow to use low THC oil medical marijuana in Georgia law, as you know. So what we know in past scientific field, so timely manner is a neurology, one of the best neurology journal is a neurology journal is a 2014, saying is the key recommendations of a systemic review based upon the 1948 through the November 2013 in terms of MS, epilepsy, movement disorder. There is out there is about 34 studies available. However, among the only 8 out of 34 as a class 1. Class 1 is a highly recommended of study, which is the double-blind control studies. That means scientifically there's no bias. It's scientific is a high class. Class 1 means that is highly recommend of what the data is available, which is 8. So among those 34 studies, what kinds of medical marijuana using for the test? So that's the list is following, but it's very small font. I will just say to you, there's 3 components. One is the oral administrations, which is like exactly medical marijuana. That is those one is one category. So as you see here is the Germany and then not tested, and then NIH, better say NIH, and then as you know is the synthetic THC, which is the Marinol, which is a trading name, Dronabinol. Interesting is coming from the Solberry Pharmaceutical Company, state in our Georgia, is Marietta, Georgia. That is Marinol, which is a synthetic THC, not the natural plant coming from. This is synthetic one thing. And then the other one, another synthetic one is Nebinol, known as a New Jersey-based pharmaceutical. That's one category of they studied with the medical marijuana as oral substance. Second category is oral spray, nasal spray and spray, and not the smoke, spray. This is coming from the Sentiva, which is the product from the UK-based pharmaceutical company, GW Pharma. Now is a study ongoing in the US in the phase 2 study. It's not the end of study yet, but it's still ongoing studies, which is the second category. Number 3 category is a smoke, like just a smoke, marijuana smoke. But as you know, that does not give you detail of a concentration of what component is, because the smoke is the nature is you cannot concentrate how much is the THC is, how much is the CBD is, how much. So we don't have any kinds of control system in the smoke. That is the 3 component using this component, and then past several years has been studied. One is a new thing is the CBD, cannabidiol, which is the trade name is Epidiolex, which is a UK-based GW Pharma using, which we're using our study right now. So again, there is the 4 component overall, but the next slide will show you from the 3 component what is the scientific data recommend from the study. So let me summarize what we know as the key recommendations from the past studies. Number 1, spasticity, like a pain, or spasm, like MS patients, ALS patients, terminal mitochondrial disease, etc. Those spasticity is clearly, by the study, effective. There's no doubt. It's a scientific background. So the study shows from using the oral cannabis extract or synthetic substance, and nebisimor is clearly effective, no doubt. Second, central pain, painful spasm, oral cannabis extract, as you hear the testimony, effective, no doubt. So that is a scientific proven effective component. And then the rest of it is not effective. Urinary discomfort, tremor, Parkinson's disease, Huntington disease, Tourette syndrome, cervical dystonia, epilepsy, according to the 2013 data, was probably ineffective. There's no data saying is marijuana or substance, whatever it is not proven for scientific. Therefore, next since the last year, a few years ago, begin to test, is that true? But as you know, many individual stories saying it's working good. Why is the scientific is not proving for this? That's why I come up with the scientific background. I will share you what we are going to do right now, what is ongoing, what is the data available. Next slide, I will show to you what we know is 2015 as today. So before move on to the synthetic THC was approved from the US FDA, even 1985, that's a long, long time ago already, the THC available, dronabinol, which is anorexia-associated weight loss in adult in AIDS patients, nausea, vomiting associated cancer. Probably Dr. Wedmore will discuss it later on, but the next is the abinol is also same thing. Synthetic cannabinoid is good for nausea, vomiting, therefore FDA approved for in US. So why is we so much illegal or some other law does not permit? Because of THC. THC is one of the components from the medical marijuana for the leisure. But the THC, clearly scientific background saying is not good for brain, because based upon next one. Because our brain has a CB1 receptor bunch of our brain, particularly in the growing brain, like a fetus, newborn, children's, even adult. We have a bunch of CB1 receptors available that is affected by the THC. Then what? That give you the damaging to the growth of a neuron. Our nervous system is not naturally growing by the THC if you're taking. The THC interfere with the cell structure and protein turnover in the neuron. You know, the neuron has to survive by the THC affect to interfere, inhibit of growing. And then THC expose alter the connections of a fetal brain of mice and human as well. In human fetus, cannabis exposure also reduce neuron growth in the brain. Therefore, we are saying that THC is not good at all to the human brain. That's the scientific proven. That's why we concern is how much THC allowed to our individual to taking, even those good things from other components. As you know, the marijuana has more than 85 chemical substance. THC is one of a major one, but it's not good for brain development. That's the key we have to remember in order to move on further what to do. And then in terms of regarding epilepsy, THC is not good at all, make it worse because of our excitatory system bring up the seizures. We want to holding inhibiting of GABA system, but the THC making enhancing of excitatory system. Therefore, THC is not good at all for seizure control, period, which is a scientific proven. Is no doubt. So THC is not good for epilepsy. And then regarding behavior, deficiency social behavior in chronic cannabinoid receptor agonist treating the animal. So animal data set is THC exposed the effect to the behavior problem. So therefore, we have to keep in remember that THC is not good at all. That's why the law is there, but we need to compromise what to do. So keep in remember those for the future. So now with that, what kinds of studies going on? Because of individual testimony or some other anecdotal test, always medical marijuana is good. Is that really good? That's why the study started on the last year, GW Pharma initiative studies. In the same time, the GW Pharma graciously giving the doctors to using their patients who is a very intractable procedures, they giving the expanded study, like a compassionate use. So that's data is available. I'll share with you those. But again, as this slide shows, still ongoing study. Dravet syndrome is already closed, one study, and the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, one of the worst syndrome of epilepsy, still ongoing phase 2 study in the international-wise, not only the U.S. Tuberous sclerosis complex, childhood epilepsy syndrome, all those epilepsy field still ongoing study. I hope within the 1 year, 2016, probably sum up the data and then submit to the FDA. Hopefully, the end of the year, next year or following year, we'll get the answer. But in the meantime, do we have any data? Yes, we do have some data. So I will show it to you of compassionate patients only, not the double-blind class 1 study. This is clearly can be biased. Because of who is going to have a medicine, parents knows, doctors know, everybody knows. This is not the double blind. But here is the data, what we know so far. This data is from the April this year, is by December this year, we'll have update of this data run by NYU, Dr. Davinsky. So here is the 4 weeks exposure of CBD. This is CBD, using the CBD Epidiolex, which is provide from the GW Pharma free. And as you see here, total patients is a green bar. Next one is the Dravet syndrome, is worst scenario patient, non-Dravet syndrome, 3 categories. Let's look at the green bar first. 4 weeks is a total median percentage reduction, so total is 40%, and then move on to about the 50, and then about 55%, and then stay about the 50% total seizures. But however, Dravet syndrome is worst scenario, is a drop seizure, is severe seizure, is much better outcome, 50%, 60%, even 65%, stay above 50% of seizure reductions, what we know from the data. But hopefully next month we'll have a more update of a study result. Here is look at the total number of more than 50% responder. As you see here, Dravet has been clearly shows more than 50% of seizure reduction, getting better even week 24. So again, is a CBD is working some seizure, not all the patients, but certain seizure. But to me, personal experience is a worse seizure is much better control rather than minor seizures. I think this is not due to the severity because of the reporting system. Because if it's a mild seizure, you cannot pick up the 100% sure. But if a harder seizure, you're able to count without force. Because of wherever big seizures, the observer of healthcare people. They always understand what the child has a seizure. Therefore, accuracy of there's no bias to better or not better or misreport. Here is a medium percentage reductions of atonic. Atonic means a drop seizure, just a drop. That's a harder seizures. Harder seizure is a superior response from the CBD, as you see here. Or atonic patient, 27, small number, but is clearly beneficial. LGS also is beneficial. So harder seizure, the better response to the CBD from the expanded study data so far. What is the safety data? Very benign. Is at least one adverse is 77%, 3/4 of them they report, such as somnolence, some drowsy, and diarrhea. Some patients are opposite ways, constipation, but diarrhea is the most, but it's only 17%. Fatigue, 17%, and decreased appetite, 16%, even though they do have increased appetite usually. So side effect profile is from the expanded study is not terrible. Get rid of this medication compared to the other medication. So what we have from the medical marijuana in Colorado, where is they available, what kinds of data we have? We don't have any scientific data. Here is the report, is 2013, was a questionnaire, parents questionnaire. This is not the scientific data, but what we have here. The questionnaire, how much is your child is, since in the medical marijuana, how is it good? Everybody is motivated. That's why they said it's good. But responder, as among the Dravet cases, DUS syndrome, worst scenario patients motivated, and they reported of this. That's the only one we can get it from this data. Is everybody, 84% is they said decreased seizure frequency. But still, this is the open questionnaire. It's not the scientific data. So side effect from that, the questionnaire, again, is drowsiness, fatigue is the most common, but it's a better mood, it's better quality life issues, increase the alertness, better. That's why they said it's good, but we need to have a scientific data, really that's the case or not. This is some reported of who has a motivated, who has a good outcome, only they reported. That's the nature of a questionnaire study. And the next one is a similar, the survey, what we have last year, August, a 1-month survey, and 117 patients was a respond from the 200 response. It's a LGS, and the severe case has been good report, more than 50, about 50%. Let me skip this one. So now is the some other parental reporting of response to the oral cannabis, which is a medical marijuana extract. And the report is this year, behavior, one of the journal, Colorado registrations marijuana has motivated some family, like what you see from our Georgian, and they come to Florida, Colorado, and then they have 50% of patients have moved to Colorado for who has response. Very highly motivated family, they giving the good responder. It's more than 50%. So that's the nature. So with that, so our governor and our representatives is the support of we have to move on. That's what we started talking about since last July. Now it's starting on the January this year. So as you see here is initial 50 patients want to enroll, and they graciously from the GW Pharma donated of medication CBD, Epidiolex, and then we running now Georgia, Augusta, 2 sites of Atlanta, 1 site of Savannah, now is ongoing. With the intractable between 1 to 18 years old patients. So now is not the one state, but it's the first state in the United States. But it's the many other states like Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, Minnesota, Florida, South Carolina, Maryland, Mississippi. They want to follow what Georgia did it. So they are in processing. Now is Minnesota is ongoing. And then the North Carolina, some other ways they do, not exactly the same, but similar pattern now is ongoing. But Georgia is the first state governors sponsors of study ongoing this year. So now is the some kinds of unserved issues, medical marijuana, which I circulated to our members. And the 8 point was some concern in medical field. Number one, state approval is rely on low quality scientific evidence. Anecdotal report, individual testimonial, registry initiative, and public opinion rather than physician initiated. Number two, there is an inconsistency in the how medical conditions are qualified for marijuana use within state and between the state. Number three, unlike most FDA approval drug that typically has one or two active constituents, but marijuana has more than bunch of chemical. Why is the difference? Number four is some individual cannabinoids are already commercially available, which I show you already synthetic true product is available. Number five, while the acute adverse effect of marijuana is quite well known, the effect of repeated exposure need further study to what really scientifically. Number six is the interactions with the marijuana with the other drug need for the study. Therefore, ongoing study will give you the data near soon what medications interact is concerning or not concerning, etc. That is coming only from the scientific study. Still, we'll have a soon, near soon. Number seven, endocannabinoid system is critical in brain development, which I mentioned to you, the maturation process, especially during the adolescence and young growing children. Number eight, it is important to understand mechanism underlying the potential beneficial effect marijuana. So if the goal is to make marijuana available for medical purpose, then it's unclear why the approval process should be different from that used for other medication. That's what we have to think about. So go back to this 5 and 8 conditions. So in terms of my field is epilepsy, and how many children now is exposed to the Indiogen. So as you see here, expanded about 27, including myself, in the Atlanta. Dravet is 11 patients. Lennox-Gastaut about 12 patients. Georgia cannabis as today, as yesterday, 39 children has been enrolled. Among the 39, 23 individual children has been exposed CBD already. As ongoing, some other interesting data coming. So now is throughout the international field. So what is going on internationally? GW Pharma initiated a study as the day for yesterday. One of the Dravet syndrome already closed. It will come out soon, the data. And then number 2 study, Dravet study, 71 patients enrolled, 46 randomized. That means class 1 study. Randomized means one group placebo, one group real Epidiolex. That is the ongoing 46 patients randomized already. Lennox-Gastaut, 48 patients has randomized. I think near soon we'll have at least 100, 200 patients randomized. Scientific data will come soon. And then the 4th study, Lennox-Gastaut study, is 51 randomized. Georgia, we are starting, actually today is a site visit coming, and then we'll begin to enroll next week. And then the compassionate studies, free compassionate is 112 patients has been exposed throughout the nations so far. So now is the concern, which is our group has been saying is Georgia Department of Public has not provided recommendation to the physicians. If you see the website, decision to allow the patients to use low THC oil to the physician's sole discretions. That means the physician knows there's no data for the physician. That's the problem we have to think about. And so we have to wait for some other scientific data to honor to the guidance to the physician. Number 2, guidance for the physician is not being provided by the governing scientific organization, but instead of adequate group, such as we have a website that's available. But again, there is no guidance, dose, etc., etc. Even so, let me tell you the dose. CBD, what Georgia studies ongoing is study on the 5 milligram per kilo per day, and then up to the 25 milligram per kilo per day. But usually the first slide, they only given 10 milligram per kilo, or some medical marijuana is maybe 5 milligram per kilo. Very small dose. But scientifically, we already knew what is the ideal dose from the ongoing study, about at least 20 milligram per kilo per day is the ideal dose, far above what you do from the medical marijuana extract. So that is the scientific say is we have to enough medication to to achieve the benefit. So that is the ongoing study will tell us how much will be. But right now we don't have any really available. As you hear for the last month's testimony, the label doesn't say anything about the concentration, the dose. But that's the problem is. So now is number 3 is a manufacturer claim for the CBD contained product has been inconsistent and variable. That's why even FDA has issued a warning letter test result for false misleading claim for product contains CBD THC. So what is the recommend that we can give it from our group? Continue expanded support for the research, like what we have been going right now. Advocacy with the federal government for continued research. Explore opportunity for the Georgia continue to expand its role in marijuana research. So I think we are the first state, the really ongoing scientific field to support for our Georgian who has a particular one disease, epilepsy. So I wonder whether we expand it for the other disease condition. I don't know yet, but it could be. But we got to have a more scientific data available for the safety beneficial for our Georgian. Thank you.
Dr. Park, thank you. Boy, that's some good data for us and good information for us. And I imagine we may have several questions. And so, again, members, if you have questions, press your button. We'll get to you. I have a couple comments, and then we'll go to the questions. I think we clearly need to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, and to Governor Deal and his representative, Mr. Teague. I think the state owes a great deal of gratitude to Governor Deal for taking the initiative to start the clinical trial process at GRU. I think we are on the cutting edge of that, and you are on the cutting edge of it. And so we're grateful to Governor Deal for the initiative, leadership in doing that, and for you, Dr. Park, for being involved and getting right in the middle of it. So thank you for that. I think we also clearly see that there's probably some need for federal action as well too. We can only do so much at the state level, and clearly there's some need for federal action as well too. Okay, well, I think we got some questions. Dr. Reese, that's you? Okay. Yep. There you go. If you'll hitting the button again one more time, there you go. That's right. Once you hit them. Okay. Okay. There you go.
So we actually know a good bit of research has actually been done as far as the enzymatic pathway is concerned for marijuana, and looking actually at that, and it's metabolized through the CYP-C9 as well as the cytochrome P450 system 384 in the liver. And we know that there's drug interactions that actually exist for that. We already know that, such as fluconazole will actually inhibit the metabolism of the marijuana, and then also the THC can it will also interact with warfarin as well, and also rifampin. So there's actually a good bit of research already out there as far as drug interactions are concerned with THC and marijuana. So I just wanted to point that out. And there was some research from Washington State School of Pharmacy. They've actually done research in that particular area. So
there's clearly some research out there.
There's some research out there on the metabolism and drug interactions. And so at the next meeting, we'll have a pharmacist share. But pharmacists clearly, if the state chooses to go in this direction, pharmacists need to be involved in the monitoring and counseling and consulting in this process. So.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that testimony, I think, from someone from the Pharmacists Association. Right. Thank you. Senator Underman, I think you had a question. I think I skipped over you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate your research and your ability to be able to help us make good decisions. You've been very beneficial, I know, for me, in particular, trying to make decisions. My question was not specifically about the studies, but about your background, and maybe you know the answer. When you were talking about women who are pregnant and smoke marijuana while they're pregnant, that it creates fetal abnormalities. And I was just wondering if those babies that are born, has there been any studies on that? And does it mimic the symptoms exhibited in babies that are born that have suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome? Is it the type of neurological damage that is done with alcohol as it is with marijuana?
The answer is I don't aware any report systemically studies for the mom who has been smoked and then what is the ended up to those.
Mm-hmm.
But as you well know, once it's a smoke, those amount of THC can go to the baby fetus as well.
Right.
So therefore, the same effect to the what I say to you is the animal study and the fetal studies are THC what do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's exactly the same, but it's not in this stage to testing for those exposed to the marijuana smoke mom, what's the baby.
Mm-hmm.
So
there's no studies been done on it?
Right now, we do have an ongoing study for the mom who is exposed to the AED, anti-seizure medications.
Right.
What does the baby do, which is they clearly have data last year. So now it's ongoing prospective, sponsored by the NIH. You know, the AED has been available for many, many years, but only this year begin to have a NIH sponsored study to see what your questions about the exposed to the seizure medication, what does the baby do? So right. So therefore, the answer to you probably takes for many, many years and to find out data. But it's a common sense, scientific way is THC to affect the baby brain. Therefore, same probably effect to the fetus. Yeah.
That's why I was trying to see if there was a conclusion of alcohol and marijuana, if it was the same.
Yeah.
It seems strange that after all these years there hasn't been studies on that, because we take care of all those kids.
Money will tell you. Sponsors of a fund of research. That's
all comes back to money.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, when you were talking about the fact that we needed, the main thing that we needed from your research, this is what I got from it, excuse me, the main thing we needed was for the providers to be able to know how much of a dosage and how much of a concentration. And that's the objective of the study. My question revolves around, I know you're a neurologist, is that correct?
Yeah.
When a person goes to a physician, and I think this was a deficit in the bill that we wrote, if you go to a neurologist and a neurologist is treating you, and they write the prescription for the medical marijuana for the card.
They write a certification. They're not writing a prescription, they're certifying.
Right, they're certifying. But any physician can write for any different diagnosis, right? So you can go to a primary care doc, even though you may be seen by a neurologist, and the primary doc can give permission to take it, right? Wouldn't it be more beneficial that it be disease specific to a subspecialist? Because if you're working on developing the protocol for dosage and concentration, that those subspecialists would be much more attuned to what the needs are of a specific diagnosis. Do you understand my question?
Yes. Answer is likely yes, but even though it's a specialist, they don't have any data yet at this moment.
Right, I understand
so
that.
That's the problem.
But when we get that data, would it not be more beneficial for those people that specialize in one disease process, the 8 diseases that we have up there, that they be more acutely aware of the research and the data to be able to give those doses?
But however, we are living in the U.S. The medical system U.S. Don't have restrictions you got to treat because you have a specialty, no one else.
Yeah, like
There's
you have a medical home, right?
Yeah,
If you're
but-
in a medical home and that medical home constitutes a primary care, a PCP, then how would you get down to the level of a neurologist, right?
Yeah. So the realistically is in the U.S. practice, medical practice, you cannot. First one, you cannot see it, or you can see it. There's no way we can restrict.
Right. Well, I was just trying to look into the future and looking to see if that was going to be a problem. I appreciate your answer.
Senator Ehrman, it may be. Dr. House, you want to take, I know the Georgia Medical Composite Board has been actually dealing with that specific issue as folks are,
Have they?
yeah, as they've been having folks getting certified for the registry. Dr. House, do you want to address that? You up for doing that just for a second?
We are working on the rules, and they are a work in process, and so they could change drastically from this point. But as the rules state, you have to have a patient-physician relationship to certify that they can use this medication, to issue the cards. We have never been in the business of restricting physicians' scope of practice. So I don't know that we would tackle that, making it for a specific disease for a specific physician. If it's in the scope of practice of their training and ability, then they have a license to practice medicine and surgery in the state of Georgia. But the rules do state there has to be that patient-physician relationship.
Before someone can issue a certification.
Before they can issue the
Because
card.
technically all they're doing is certifying that that particular individual has the specific qualifying diagnosis. Is
That
correct?
they have it, that they've evaluated them, that they have the disease, and that they are treating them for that disease, regardless of whether they refer them out to specialists or whatnot. But they have that patient-physician relationship.
Okay. That help any? Yeah, sure.
Well, that helps, but I guess I'm thinking down the road, and when he does develop, and when we do have the research that says what dosage and what concentration, and you filter that down to the subspecialty groups that hopefully are specialists in it, that you could theoretically refine your policy stating that, couldn't you? That it would be disease specific?
That'd be a really slippery slope. I mean, if you just take it out of this very touchy issue and just say cardiac medications, we don't prescribe that physicians prescribe a certain dosage of a calcium channel blocker for hypertension, even though we have evidence that says that one dosage over another might be more beneficial and maybe a certain dosage may be harmful. So we just, at the medical board, just doesn't enter into that field. If they, however, go outside the scope of their practice or outside what is considered the appropriate practice of medicine, we will penalize them for that. But, however, we're not that proscriptive.
Right, I'm familiar with that with the plastic surgeons.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. That actually kind of get what
Yeah,
you're
it
getting
does.
to?
It does. I'm just trying to look into the future because, we started off very generically, but as the research and everything becomes more refined, it seems like the policies and the laws should follow that refinement.
Yeah.
And that was just the point I was trying to make.
We have faced challenges because I've had many citizens already contact me and say, well, my current physician, for whatever reason, has a bias against medical marijuana and therefore will not certify me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are going to have to deal with that at some point because citizens are then having the decision of, okay, well, do I change doctor?
Well, that gets back to the issue of medical home.
Yeah.
And that medical home being knowledgeable about what's available.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dr. House. Dr. Wetmore, you got a question for Dr. Park or a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think, first of all, that there is really no definitive evidence about what marijuana does to human fetuses. Most of the studies were done with synthetic marijuana components in animal studies. Some of the human studies are very confounded because most of the women that have been smoking marijuana while they're pregnant also take other drugs, alcohol and other drugs, and so it's impossible to sort it out. THC has a very different effect on the developing nervous system than ethanol, so the phenotype would be very different, although it's hard to work out in human fetuses. Also, when we talk about dosing with cannabis oil, that's not a pharmaceutical grade compound, and so depending upon the trace amounts of other elements that are present, you may have more or less. And as I'll be presenting, it also depends upon the mixture. So when you're looking at a pure compound, that's very different than perhaps a naturally derived compound that has some added trace elements.
Thanks, Dr. Whitmore. Okay, any other questions for Dr. Park? Or do you have one? Come. Yep. I think I've got you now, so try. Oh, no.
Just to mention here, and this goes off of what Dr. Whitmore said, is as far as dosing is concerned in Minnesota, they do have a medical cannabis program there, and it involves physicians and pharmacists, and they have specific dosing algorithms, and they are using the natural product, not the synthetic THC, and they have specific dosing algorithms for cancer, HIV, and epilepsy. And I think that's one thing we have to look at when we look at these studies, is many of them are looking at synthetic THC, which I know that's what the study is focused on, versus the natural cannabis product. So, and then the other point, a question I actually have is, in your study with GRU, in your exclusion criteria, specifically looking at adverse effects, is in your exclusion criteria, or in how your methods that you set it up, are folks that are kids that are enrolled in that study, are they taken off of all other medications, including any seizure medications and or any OTC products, and how do you control for those factors in the study?
There's no exclusions for the medication, but has to have a trial at least 4 seizure medication in past. That's the inclusion criteria. In other words, has been proven for seizure was not well-controlled, conventional, what available medications. And then when he's enrolled, they have to take in at least 2 current conventional seizure medications is the stable conditions, not the 0 seizure medication.
Okay, and do you track any other medicines that they're on unrelated to seizures? So any type of...
we do all the listed, and then the blood level and the interactions and other things ongoing.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
You sure can. Mm-hmm.
That issue actually came up when we first started, because we were saying that and when we talked with the families, that it wasn't practical that if a child was doing fairly well, but they were still having the seizures, to humanely just take them off of everything. I mean, what parent would make that decision to just withdraw everything? And that was the conclusion we came to.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I think the experience anecdotally has been that a lot of the families have been able to do that, though. The ones that have been out in Colorado, and some of the ones the ones that are here probably could provide some of that testimony, but which is interesting. Any other questions, Dr. Park? Dr. Park, just a couple of comments. You asked the question up there, why is what we're doing different than medical standard approval process? And I can tell you this, as you and I have had this discussion, that what we were driven by, at least in the last 2 sessions and eventually into the legislation that Governor Deal signed this past spring, was that a lot of these kids didn't have time to wait for FDA approval, and I know that goes against the grain of the medical practice, but that we were having kids dying while we were waiting for FDA approval, and so that's the challenge: is how do we balance that? How do we balance going through standard medical protocol, but also providing an option or an alternative for our citizens before it's too late, for an improvement of quality of life, for whatever the short term may be of quality of life left for the citizens? That's the challenge we have, I think.
I can answer to you. We opened the door for our Georgian who suffer from the particular epilepsy, which is ongoing. I don't think we deny anyone who really needs it but cannot get it and then die. I don't see any reason for it. There is open the door for 4 sites. Now it's ongoing 3 sites. we enroll. Or again, is that we have a waiting list there, but we go to the prioritize which one really needs it, bring in every time.
Right.
So we do try to enroll the many. We just expanded, get approval for 60 patients because now the trend is so much go up faster.
Right.
So we already prepare the next 60s.
Right.
So I think in Georgia, at least, we graciously opened the door to chance to giving the Epidiolex, which is the very purely CBD.
Right, and I agree with you. But for those kids that are getting involved in that clinical trial, and I've chatted with many of the families, it's working, and which is great. Yeah. But I've talked to almost just as many families who were excluded from the trial for whatever reason, maybe they're not as severe, whatever the case may be, and other citizens who don't have epilepsy and who would potentially have one of the qualifying conditions that don't obviously that don't meet the criteria. So that's kind of the struggle that we have is trying to find a solution, a real solution, while also balancing it with standard medical practices, and that's the challenge we had. The other good news, I mean, at least from your data too, what you're showing is there's significant improvement from the GW data you just showed. I mean, 50 to 60 to 70% reduction in seizures, limited side effects from the product that you've been providing, that GW Pharmacy is providing. So I mean, that's great news. Yeah. That at least early indications are that we're moving toward a product that really will provide some real benefits. So that's great news. So, any other follow-up questions? Thank you, Dr. Park. We appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate the testimony today and what you're doing at GRU as well, too. Okay, next up, Dr. Wetmore. If you want to take the podium, I think you have a PowerPoint presentation for us as well, too. And if Dr. Wetmore, as you're getting ready, if you would just kind of remind, I think most of the members of the commission know your expertise, and we've actually heard from you at a committee last year.
Sure.
But many of the folks here and those, and maybe the 14 people that are watching online, maybe don't know who you are. So why don't you kind of give a little background as well too?
Yeah. So I am associate professor of pediatrics at Emory University School of Medicine. I did my training, my undergraduate training was at Harvard University. My medical school training was at the University of Minnesota, my home state. And I have a PhD in neurobiology from the Karolinska Institute, and this is in developmental neurobiology and histology. I completed fellowship training in oncology and neuro-oncology. Clinically, I take care of children with cancer, especially brain tumors. I had a basic research lab in neuroscience for more than 10 years at Mayo Clinic, where I studied neuronal development and also the proliferation, the difference between normal and cancerous proliferation of stem cells within the nervous system. I'm now recently at Emory University and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, where I'm the director of clinical and translational research for the entire Department of Peds and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and particularly within the Developmental Therapeutics Program at AFLAC. And I should say also that these are my opinions and don't necessarily reflect the opinions of my institutions of employment. So
duly noted.
They wanted to have legal review it before I present, and I said, no, this is my work. This is not their work. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, so you work for, let's see, 5 different folks, so maybe 1 out of 5 you ought to be okay.
And you know what? And everyone has a different opinion, and that's right. What's so wonderful.
That's exactly right.
So this is I think I have 16 slides or so, and some of them I can skip over because of the introduction done by, by Dr. Park. Oops, let me get this. So here we go. All right. Overview, just there have been many historical references to medical use of marijuana. I'll briefly touch on those. And definitions, and Dr. Park gave a very nice introduction. Some of the biology of the cannabinoid system within the nervous system and other systems, and then some preclinical and clinical studies. So clearly there have been a number of historical references. I think speakers in prior commission hearings have also referenced this. I think that history certainly, I was a history major, history and philosophy in college, and history certainly has a way of remembering some of the sentinel events. And I think that cannabis has been used throughout history for hundreds and really thousands of years, and there must be something to it, I think. Otherwise, it wouldn't have persisted for quite so long if we just think of the evolution and natural selection. So ranging from the early Chinese Emperor Qin dynasty through Chinese medicine, Eber's papers, we know that Shakespeare likely smoked marijuana. There were pipes found in his garden. I think a number of people have used it throughout history. So that's without a doubt. And the components of marijuana, there are over 100 different cannabinoids contained within the plant. The active psychoactive component is really THC, as we've heard from other speakers. The THC actually acts at 2 different receptors, the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and it's very lipid soluble. That means there's good brain penetration, as we've heard before. Certainly the most rapid way to get it into the brain is through smoking it, but that's also the least consistent. Certainly oral ingestion, you can have a delayed peak effect, and there is some concern about taking too much orally before you actually feel an effect within the nervous system. The cannabidiol is a major non-psychoactive component of cannabis, and that's what is being used in the Epidiolex study that's being done here. I want to say that I was also part of one of the original drafters of that GRU protocol. I traveled to Augusta now over a year ago to help draft that protocol, and I'm helping to guide the studies at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and Emory for that study. So we know that the cannabidiol also acts and seems to potentiate, it's an agonist at the serotonin receptor, so therefore if a person is taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that's certainly a pharmacological interaction potentially that you may want to consider. It modulates clearly the intracellular calcium concentration. So if binding at that receptor changes the calcium level within a cell, that can change the excitability of a neuron, a muscle cell, any type of cell. And so it clearly has a biologic effect, and I think it's a myriad of effects. There are a number of effects it can have on different cells, so I think it's very hard to make a hard and fast conclusion that marijuana does this without considering the type of cell, whether the cell's in a dish or the cell's in a person or the cell's in an animal, and the source of the cannabidiol, whether it comes from a pharmaceutical grade versus a natural grade, which there are pluses and minuses to both of them, but they're just different. So it's very difficult to say that THC is bad for the nervous system. There is not conclusive evidence of that, and I beg to differ with Dr. Park. And I don't want to be confrontational, but it's just not. I mean, you can't just say that. There is evidence for and against.
Okay, hang on, gang. Okay. I don't mind a little bit of response, but if it gets out of hand, we're going to have you removed. So, okay.
So these receptors are 7 transmembrane G-coupled receptors. These receptors can act in a number of different organs, and I have some pictures later on to show that. They actually activate adenylocyclase and cyclic ANP. That's a known action of stimulation of these receptors. And the CB1 is primarily thought to be responsible for the psychoactive effect. These are primarily found in the CNS. They're presynaptic. That means it's on one side of the synaptic cleft. There's a regulation, and it also regulates neurotransmitter release. So depending upon the exposure, the duration, the age of the organism, the age of the nervous system, it can affect and have very different effects. The receptors are present on GABAergic and glutamatergic neurons, and they mediate pain, stress, energy consumption, lipogenesis, and immune function. And these studies are what I think when Dr. Park was referring to scientific evidence, there's a lot of different types of evidence. It's all data, but there's stronger data and weaker data. And all the studies that I'm talking about are published in reputable peer-reviewed medical journals. I haven't gone to some of the less the ones that aren't peer-reviewed. So CB2 is primarily found in the peripheral nervous system, some in the central nervous system. It's expressed on immune cells, including microglia, which are thought to be the immune cells within the nervous system. So that microglia are very important in responding to toxins in the nervous system. They respond to scavenging ions, and they also help the neurons remain healthy within the nervous system. So the endocannabinoid system, and this is important to understand because when we talk about an effect it may have in killing or fighting cancer cells, it's important to know what other cells it can affect. Most drugs we take and most things we're exposed to have positive and negative effects, even things like Tylenol and water. If you drink too much water, you can have a very adverse effect. So it always is something in moderation that we're discovering. So the complex lipid signaling network, and where there are a number of endogenous agonists. So within our body, we have proteins and molecules that act at the cannabinoid receptors. This was discovered in the 1990s or so. It's not known, it's not well understood what an exogenous ligand, so if you take excessive or THC or CBD and it competes with binding at these receptors, it's not really well understood what those responses, what those effects on the body can be. The endogenous ligands are AEA, this anandamide, and 2-AG. So they're distributors of arachidonic acid. The big thing here is that they're important in lipid membrane and lipid health. And they are similar molecules to that involved in blood clotting. That's specifically eicosanoids. So I think the bottom line of all this slide and some of this is that there's a natural system within our bodies where there are natural chemicals that bind to these receptors. We need to be very careful how we modify the binding to those receptors and how we influence our internal homeostasis. But clearly the conditions for which we're considering and allowing the use of cannabidiol, those are very disordered systems. So even just the process of a seizure is very harmful to a child's nervous system. So we're not talking about a normal, healthy child taking something. We're talking about trying to help a child or help an adult that's suffering from a pathologic process.
Dr. Whitmore, I want to just zero in on that for just a second, if you don't mind me interrupting, because I know what Dr. Park said was, I think, relevant, that THC use can potentially damage the brain. And what you're saying,
I
that
think he said it was bad for the brain.
Yeah, okay, yeah, if I said it correctly, but seizures are doing just as much damage to the brain.
Well, they're doing damage. I don't know that I can quantify just as much.
Right.
But if you give, Diet Coke hurts rats too. If you give a rat 800 gallons of Diet Coke, they're not going to do well. And if you give a mouse or a rat or an animal huge amounts of THC or CBD or anything, you can cause damage to the nervous system. Yeah. Those studies were not done in humans. We do not know what these compounds do to the developing human brain. We do not know that. There is no data for that, and there's no scientific evidence for that. That doesn't say it doesn't cause damage, but we know that multiple sclerosis, intractable seizures, that is a damaged nervous system, and that pathologic process is continuing to damage the nervous system. MS plaques, you have normal cells that come and try to clean up the plaques. They damage, by a bystander effect, they damage the healthy neurons in those areas. Seizures, it's dramatically toxic to the nervous system. Yeah. The release of neurotransmitters, it damages cells. So even if you could stop the seizures today, that brain has damage that it sustained from the seizures. Right. So when we're talking about the relative effects of potentially good or potentially ill of THC in the nervous system, we have to understand the context. Yeah. We're not talking about a normal, healthy, developing baby with no adverse events going on in the nervous system. We're talking about children that are suffering terribly. And if there's something that might help in some ways, perhaps we can use it carefully.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Continue. Sorry.
So the endogenous cannabinoid system, it modulates a lot of things, and this is a review. And I have references at the end of my slides. So you can see that it modulates a number of different things from the nervous system, and I think I can use the mouse. So from up here in the nervous system in the brain, it acts through the peripheral nervous system, this nodose ganglion. It affects motility in the gut. So this is going down, and this is specifically looking at the GI tract. So you're looking at the nervous system within your gastrointestinal tract. It affects the inflammation. It affects permeability within the nervous system. It affects immune activation, both positive and negatively. So there are a plethora of responses that occur in the body with the natural, with the natural effect of the ligands. So things in the liver, steatosis, that's developing a fatty liver, fibrinogenesis, hepatic apoptosis. It does seem stimulation of CB1 can harm liver cells, but it also can decrease. When you look at the CB2 up here in the right-hand corner, I don't want to touch it too much because it seems to advance it. But when you have CB2, so you have a balance between CB1 and CB2. So you have positive and negative effects. And so you may have a positive effect in the sense that benefiting, reducing fibrosis, reducing inflammation, or you can have a harmful effect. It just depends upon the ratio and the balance. So you cannot say objectively that a compound is good or bad. There is no intrinsic property. It's how a compound is used and in what dose, in what exposure, in what environment. It's going to have a very different effect in the brain of an 80-year-old person than in the brain of a 3-year-old person. So the palliative effects. There is no doubt that cannabinoids have a very positive and palliative, very helpful effect for many conditions. Specifically, as Dr. Park mentioned earlier, that Marinol, that's a synthetic compound, has been approved long ago for chemotherapy-induced nausea, vomiting. Appetite stimulant. It is not FDA approved for children in either of these uses. So while it's FDA approved for adults, in pediatrics we use Marinol off-label. It is not FDA approved for children. As many of the drugs we use, many of the anti-epileptic drugs that are used in children are not FDA approved for use in children. I think all of the cancer therapy that we use is not FDA approved in children. It's been approved in adult, and we use it off-label in children. So FDA approval is one step to understanding and approving a medication. And there's a lot of controversy and a lot of difficulty with that. And I have quite a bit of experience with the FDA because I have petitioned and held several investigational drug applications for use in cancer therapies. I'm the author of 2 studies that are the first ever in pediatrics trials for new medications for cancer. They've never been used in children before. And the FDA has given me permission to use it. So I feel like I have experience in this realm. I know I have experience in this realm. So, and...
you clearly do, yes.
So, okay. Now...
Exclamation point, boom.
Exclamation point. Okay, so, inhibition of pain. We know clearly components of Marinol, of cannabis, are helpful in pain. As Mrs... Yes, as Ruth. I mean, I didn't want to disrespect you and call you Ruth, but my mother's name is Ruth, so that's easy to remember. So it's clearly helpful in pain, and I don't think that anyone would dispute that fact. It's approved in Canada for the use of pain. It's been used in Europe. So when we talk about not knowing dosages, we can't ignore all the literature in the rest of the world. These compounds have been used in Europe for decades, and we know the dose. We know there are reports in reputable journals. There's grade 1 scientific evidence. There's class 1 scientific evidence of the dose that's helpful for different conditions. There was a trial done in Europe in MS patients helping to control pain and to some degree spasticity. And they had a driving test, and they showed that they did not decline in their driving capability. And it states the dose, it states the duration, it states the study, and it's very good evidence. So I think there are publications and there is evidence in the literature to help guide physicians and patients in this realm. So as far as a randomized, multicenter randomized clinical trial, this is what I think would be considered a class 1 study. It was a randomized control trial done in adult cancer patients. There were nearly 200 patients. It was a 14-day course. The patients had appropriate pain management, meaning that they were generally on opioids. They were on a pretty hefty dose of opioids. The mean daily dose of morphine was 270 milligrams a day. That is an awful lot of morphine. If someone were to take that as a naive person, meaning you hadn't been on that amount of morphine, that would be enough to kill you. That's an overdose. But when you become tolerant to it, we have to consider the environment in which these medications are taken. You can't say morphine is bad or morphine is good. It depends upon the context, the individual, and the indication. So this study compared THC, CBD combination, and also THC alone, as well as a placebo. So there were 3 arms, and the pain was mixed. Some of it was bony pain. The cancer patients suffer, and bony pain is extremely difficult to control. Opioids are not sufficient to control most cancer pain. There's also neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is pain in the nerves. It can be caused by some of the cancer medicines, like vincristine causes neuropathic pain. Amputation of a limb, the limb is gone, the nerve still seems to conduct impulses, and that is a huge amount of pain. Also, if you have a large solid tumor in your leg or your arm or your breast or your abdomen, you can have extreme pain that is not able to be controlled by morphine and some of the drugs that we currently have. This study demonstrated that there was an appreciable effect. 43% of the patients taking the combination reported benefit. Now again, this was a randomized, placebo-controlled, blinded trial supporting the use of the addition of THC and CBD in conjunction with other medications. So once again, we're not looking at it by itself. There may be actions that these cannabinoids have by themselves, but they also have an action taken together with traditional medications. So, getting specifically to the treatment of cancer, and this is more the proliferation of tumor cells. So I think there's no dispute. It helps with nausea-induced vomiting. It helps with appetite stimulation. It helps with pain. But the evidence for its role in cancer, specifically the proliferation of cancer cells, is mixed. And so I'm going to try to present the mixed picture. And again, these are all done in pretty reputable journals, and I put the names of the journals in here as well. So, for example, CB1 and CB2 are often increased on tumor versus non-tumor cells. And I have a picture of this later in my presentation. So, for example, in mantle cell lymphoma, those lymphoma cells expressed very, very high levels of CB1 and CB2 that were not contained on normal lymphocytes. There seemed to be some decrease in cell survival when CB1 and CB2 were activated by the agonist. Now, the agonists can be actually cannabinoid or THC, or an agonist can be anything that acts at the CB1 or CB2 receptor. So some of these studies were done not with a marijuana derivative, but an agonist that acts at the same receptor. I hope that made sense. So there was some decreased cell survival. So now can you say, well, that kills cells? Well, not necessarily. It was that the addition, the activation of this agonist, or the activation of a THC or CBD molecule on those cells decreased the cell survival. It didn't seem to harm the normal cells as much as it harmed the tumor cells. So once again, it's a mixed environment, and you need to consider the data within the context. Some studies suggested that the expression levels of receptors on tumors was correlated with aggressiveness. Some physicians and scientists hypothesized that the cannabidiol system or the endogenous cannabinoid system may be overactivated in cancer. What does that mean? I don't know. If you have a lot more receptors, you could say, oh, it's overactivated. You could also say that it's starving for more. I mean, you have more receptors. You can't say it doesn't necessarily mean it's activated. It's a higher expression of receptors for whatever reason. We need to understand what that means and understand how we may be able to exploit that to kill tumor cells. We know that the third point here, the pharmacologic activation of cannabinoid receptors reduces tumor growth. There are many situations where this is true, and I'll speak in another slide about the mechanism. So, for example, if the CB1 receptors were knocked out, so this would be a mouse, usually mouse model. This was not done in human cells. This was done in mouse cells. So if you knock out or incapacitate that receptor, the tumor cells grew faster. So then they decided, and part of this is the proof that the activation of that receptor, so you put the CBD on the receptor, the cells grow, you knock the receptor out, and you put the CBD on, and then the cells don't grow anymore. This is just part of building evidence to say that in those cells, under those conditions, that activation of the receptor and loss of that affected the tumor cell growth. So we also know that CBD and cannabinoid receptor activation seems to inhibit new blood vessel formation. And that's important in this slide specifically. If you look at on the right side of the slide, you see this is a diagram taken from the Nature Review of Cancer, one of the most esteemed medical journals with regard to cancer. You have uncontrolled cell growth here. You have sustained angiogenesis. So angiogenesis means just the development of new blood vessels. Cannabinoids block that, both in the dish and in the animal. This has not been tested in humans, other than one of my last slides shows that in glioblastoma tumor patients, humans, they were infused with THC and there was a loss of cells and a change in the blood vessel. Now that doesn't prove that one caused the other, but we know that in animal models and in culture dishes, it does inhibit the proliferation of blood vessels in breast, liver, lung, and melanoma cells. It also seems to downregulate these two growth factors and a number of other growth factors. VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, Avastin, for example, if you've heard of that, acts against those growth factor receptors, and EGF. These are two important pathways in normal vessel development as well as cancer and tumor cell growth. It also seems that cannabinoids inhibit tumor cell migration, and these were studies that were done in animals and in humans, where they found that with the infusion of THC and a small amount of CBD, it prevented the glioma cells, which is a horrendous brain tumor, from invading the normal tissues. It seemed to decrease the way that tumor cells stuck to normal cells to creep along the pathways. It also seemed to decrease tumor cell migration in lung cancer. Those were animal studies. So then, looking at all this illustration, I cut it off the last slide just because it's too much to look at once. So you see that the cannabinoids, they affect the blood vessel growth. They also affect the cancer cells specifically. The endoplasmic reticulum stress, autophagy, that's another way of cell death, very different than apoptosis, but it's a way of inducing cell death. It inhibits the cell growth. It seems to inhibit blood vessel signals, and it also cannabinoids have a specific direct effect on cancer cells for decreasing the modulation of adhesive molecules. As I mentioned in the glioma study, it seems to decrease those cells the cancer cells from creeping along normal cells, and it decreases the level of adhesion. So this is an example of a picture taken from JCI, also a very reputable, one of the top journals in Journal of Clinical Investigation, showing normal cell, and this is immunohistochemistry. So this is when they take a section of a section of tissue, they stain it they put antibodies on it, and the antibodies bind to the protein where the protein is. So it's a way of localizing a protein within a cell. And so the brown is where the positive staining is. So if you see up here, and this is normal skin, human skin, CB1 receptor is localized right along the epidermis, right along there. It's not really located deeper in these deeper tissues, and CB2 is also located along the skin level. You see there's a little bit of faint brown staining down deeper for CB2. Now, BCC, these are two examples of skin cancer. Basal cell carcinoma is it is the most common type of cancer in humans. It's generally thought to be not invasive. It can be very disfiguring. You generally need to have it taken off, but it is not aggressive as melanoma. And the other SCC here is squamous cell carcinoma. This is a much more invasive type of tumor. And in both of these pictures, you can see there's clear brown staining with the antibodies against CB1 receptor and CB2. So clearly within the tumors, there's much more expression of both CB1 and CB2 than there is in normal tissues. And this finding over the years has led investigators to want to try stimulation of those receptors, specifically with THC or CBD, to fight the tumor growth. And they have done that with mixed success. A lot of these studies are not randomized controlled trials, but they're more anecdotal studies that support the desire to do greater trials. So this is then some in vivo data. So these are done in mice. This is combining showing anti-tumor activity of THC alone. And along the right axis here, so this is time in days, and this is a way we kind of measure the growth of a tumor in a mouse. It's usually done under the skin. The tumor volume then, and this is measuring, usually in millimeters. And this is what the tumors look like. So vehicle, over here, the top line that rises, it looks like the tumor growth increased dramatically in the vehicle-treated animal. Usually a vehicle is water or saline. It just means the vehicle in which the drug is dissolved. So this is the carrier, we say water or saline. The next greatest amount of growth was here with the THC alone. It did inhibit growth, but not as much as the temozolomide, which is a known first-line therapy for glioblastoma in humans. So THC seemed to kill off the cells, but temozolomide was more effective. But then when the last line here, when THC and the THC amount was 15 milligrams per kilogram, was combined with temozolomide, there was virtually no tumor cell growth. These are human tumors grown in a mouse flank. So it seems that the addition of THC may actually potentiate. Alone, the THC wasn't that effective, but in combined, and that allowed the investigators then to give a lower dose of the traditional chemotherapy. And this is another study showing actually the combinations of THC plus CBD further decreased the glioma growth. And I think it's hard to see with the size of the slide, but you can see I put a red arrow here showing this is a combination of the CBD plus the THC, and it cut the tumor growth in half. CBD plus THC combination. And so once again, I think it's important to note that we have to look at the data. Is it purified THC? Is it purified CBD? Is it a combination? Is it naturally derived? Is it pharmaceutical grade? And one cannot make statements blanketly about a substance without qualifying what you're speaking of and in what system. So then this was a clinical study, and this is I think my second to the last slide. So this is a clinical study of THC infusion. It was published in the British Journal of Cancer almost 10 years ago, and it was a study done in humans. There were 9 glioblastoma patients. GBM is pretty uniformly fatal. Most patients live perhaps a year. Children can live a bit longer. It's a different disease in children, but it's still a very deadly type of a brain tumor. This is what Beau Biden died of. It's what Eleanor Mondale died of. It's robbed thousands and thousands of people of their lives. And there's no known real cure. We know we can palliate GBM. The standard treatment is radiation and temozolomide. We know that often helps hold the tumor in check for about 6 to 9 months, but then the tumor comes raging back. So this study was done so the original GBM diagnosis, first surgery, standard of care, they received radiation therapy and temozolomide, then the patients relapsed. So the THC comes in the sense that there was a second surgery, so all the patients had a reconfirmation of the tumor recurrence. Physical documentation, there is no doubt that that's tumor recurrence, that's not scar tissue. And at the time of the surgery, there was a small catheter placed into the bed of the tumor, and the patients then wore like a little pack similar to an infusion pack that you would use for insulin, and it infused THC directly into the tumor bed. And this was done in Europe. It was not done in the U.S., but it was done to try to see what the effect of the THC infusion was, what effect it was on the tumor cells, what effect it was on the patient. So they had THC. All patients had at least 15 days of treatment. Some patients went on to 30 or 36 days, and then post-treatment they had another tumor biopsy in 2 patients. So the patients had the tumor taken out, confirmed, infused the THC, and then they took that tissue out, and they were able to examine the human tissue in the human brain and look at it. And in that situation, they found a decrease in the blood vessels and also tumor cells dying. Some of the tumor cells were dying. Now, this doesn't prove that THC cures cancer. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the use of THC in some situations may be beneficial, but it needs to be used carefully, and this is quite promising. Now, granted, there were only 9 patients. It wasn't randomized controlled, but there is enough evidence, I think, preclinical and clinically, it deserves investigation. And I've been in discussions with GW Pharmaceutical about bringing some of their different mixtures to clinical trial, and we're working through that. We're going to be testing some of their compounds, the different mixtures of CBD and THC, actually in the culture dish to see if they kill tumor cells, and we're going to try to pick the best dose that we take into the animals, and then after that we're going to take those trials into humans and really test it and see. And most of these humans will be children that have horrible brain tumors. To finish up this slide, we're looking then, this is a survival curve after second surgery. So after the second surgery, this is a surviving fraction. So this is, the day 0 is 100% of the patients are surviving. And then as the patients succumb to their disease, you see the survival plot. And this is a pretty typical way we do portray survival in cancer. And most of the last patients died a little bit more than 50 days out. So this seemed to extend the life of many of these patients. Often, once a tumor comes back, they're dead within just a couple of weeks. So I think that this was interesting data, interesting evidence. I know that there are ongoing studies both here and in Europe. And I have some MRIs from one of these patients. So This is, again, the tumor volume. Left axis is volume in centimeters of the tumor, time after second surgery, and the arrow signs are showing when there was a new infusion of THC. And the MRIs aren't showing up very well, but you can see the tumor is the white spot here in the brain here. This is where the tumor is. And after the second surgery, it got bigger, and then you look at week 4, week 18, and week 29. So clearly the tumor did come back. These patients then all died of their tumor, but during the period of the THC infusion, they did not suffer any ill effects. They didn't have any additional seizures. They weren't loopy or out of touch with their sensorium, and they were able to interact and have normal quality of daily life for a few more weeks. And so I think that's all I have here. So the conclusions, I think, again, my opinion, based upon the literature, THC is helpful in palliating nausea, vomiting, increased appetite in cancer patients. The combination of THC and CBD may be very helpful in relieving cancer pain. There's preclinical evidence of anti-tumor activity of these individual components as well as the combination of components. And there's also some evidence that it seems to potentiate or increase the effect of traditional chemotherapy. Some chemotherapies it may be helpful, some it may not. So it's not across the board, but in some situations it seems the addition of THC and CBD does help the potential of curing tumors, and it seems to help the activity of the chemotherapy agent. So I think clearly there's a need to perform clinical trials to determine whether it does have any activity. In cancer, it's generally not ethical to do a randomized placebo-controlled study. It's not ethical not to treat a patient treat a patient with a sugar pill, but the way we do that then is we compare it to the gold standard. So for example, a study that I would consider doing would be using radiation and temozolomide in a patient, arm A, and then arm B would be radiation therapy, temozolomide plus THC CBD combination, and then have randomized patients, and they walk in the door, and it's usually randomized with the help of a pharmacist. And so I don't know which patients are receiving the THC and not THC, and then we can see how the outcome is. And we usually power it so it's statistically powerful. If we're looking at a 10% or 20% improvement, we need a certain cohort of patients, and that's how I'm planning to run this next study. And I think that's it. And the references, it's too small. You can't read the print, but I'm happy to send the slides out to anyone.
Okay.
So I welcome questions.
Dr. Whitmore, thank you. Boy, you clearly have done your homework, and that's some interesting data. Conclusion for kind of layman terms for us is that there is obviously some research out there, whether it's conclusive or not, still, I guess, could be debated that
well, there's data to support, yes.
That THC and or CBD or some type of combination does provide some relief from pain, clearly, and possibly even a killing of cancer cells. Is that
correct? Several studies have shown that. Now, not all studies have shown that, but there's enough evidence that it's certainly intriguing, and it's a supportive for a trial. And the FDA is very interested in doing such a trial, and also the NIH is interested in funding such a trial because I've talked to them. So yes, there's data.
Good. We'd love to have them come do it here in Georgia. So yeah, hope you'll with you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we got some questions for Dr. Whitmore. I know we're getting near the end of our time here, so
we started late.
We did. We sure did. So you did good. You did good. And to the members of the commission, I realize we're listening to a lot of medical data from experts in this field, Dr. Whitmore and Dr. Park. And I know the challenge of this commission is to come up with recommendation for an in-state cultivation model in Georgia. But I think it's good for us to have this basic knowledge of where the medical community lands on this issue, even as we figure out how we structure a model in Georgia for delivering medical cannabis to our citizens. I know it's not the nuts and bolts of what the specific charge of the commission is, but I think it's important for us to have that knowledge. So.
Can I just?
You sure can.
So one other thing is, I don't know how we're going to do it, and I don't know about the security and all that business, but that's you guys. But if we were able to grow it in Georgia, we would have a better control over the components, and we'd be better able to do studies, because without it, it's whatever people get through Amazon or
Right.
wherever. And so, but if we had it, we could have regulation and we could really know what's in it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an important part of the puzzle, is making sure we have lab-tested,
Yeah.
regulated, safe product for our citizens.
And then we can
That's first.
reject it if it doesn't
Right.
meet the criteria.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Chief Cotton, you got a question?
I just, kind of, I can think you made a great point in that, we're just hearing a lot of technical information. And I think both doctors presented, information that a layperson could sit there and go, both of it is very, very informative. If you're passionate about the issue, obviously, you may lean in one direction or another. But as a layperson trying to stay on the fence and be open-minded about either side of the issue, my question, I think, that jumps out to me, and probably just the average person walking the street that really doesn't have one side or the other, is why is not the medical community and the scientific community just on fire about doing the research that you're saying? We are at 2015 and we're just now trying to do the research. Why is Colorado not leading this thing if it's legal there and they can control, their scientists, their medical field could control what you just said, what's being grown? Does that make sense? My question.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons. So one, the only federal source of marijuana is that's grown by Ole Miss, and that in order to get your hands on that, you have to go through incredible hoops, and it's very difficult to get. So there's no consistent type that we as investigators can use to evaluate it, because it's against federal law and you can't run studies like that. It's also due to a lot of misinformation, and a lot of physicians, a lot of my colleagues may not even be aware of the data, the favorable data, or the data on dosing. Some people say, well, there's no evidence on dosing, we don't know what to give. Well, there is data, and there is a lot of data out there in the published literature. We have guidance of what dose to give and what dose is helpful for different situations. So a lot of it's misinformation, a lot of it is poor information, and then just this whole aura of this medical marijuana. I mean, most of the drugs we give children with cancer and seizures are far more harmful than marijuana.
Chief Cotton, I'll interject. I think clearly it shows the need for changes at the federal level. I think that's where the obstacles to barrier
and then
to
I guess
research.
the second part of that is you talk about the difficulty in gaining the marijuana just to test. Obviously, that's a legislative issue, possibly at the federal level, I guess. But I find it kind of interesting. The general public doesn't realize this, maybe, but my canine units, for example, we can apply to the DEA and we can take marijuana that's been seized, and instead of destroying it, we can use it for training purposes. We have to have a license. We have to do those. We have to do those kind of things, and we can use other drugs too to make sure that the dogs are certified in what they're doing. If I could get a canine the ability to get drugs to be used for canine training purposes, it's beyond reason why a doctor or a scientist couldn't get some for scientific purposes. I don't. I'm just throwing that out there as a layperson.
I haven't tried lately. I know 10 years ago I was trying to look into this because I've had a long-standing interest, and really my interest in the medical use of it has increased as I treat patients anecdotally, and some of my patients have had tremendous benefit, I believe, from it. Right now, I'm not in a position, I don't have the mouse lab and all of that right now. I'm doing more human clinical stuff, but I have colleagues that have tried to get a hold of some of it, and it's been tremendously difficult. You can't use federal funds for it, and so if you're doing that type of research and publish it, there's some idea that you'll be prejudiced against the already difficult to obtain federal funding.
That's interesting.
Fair question, Chief.
Thank you.
Dr. Whitmore, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony today. We've got one, folks, if you'll hang in there with us for a little bit more, we got one more presenter, Dr. Stephen Morris. If you'll come on up. If you'll come to the center table, Dr. Morris, since I don't think you have a presentation. And Dr. Whitmore, you're good over there? You're good? Okay. Dr. Whitmore, Dr. Morris, I got to know over the last, Yep.
Can I just make a quick kind of a comment?
Yes, sir. You sure can.
We appreciate it. Please understand, we appreciate the passion that everybody feels and the interest in the issue, and that's wonderful, and freedom of speech. But there are times when I think some people over here are trying to hear the questions and responses that we can't hear, and it's just really important that we hear. So please, no disrespect intended, but please remember that.
Thank you, Mr. Rickman. Yes, there is only testimony from those here. Those who are not presenting, we'd ask that you remain quiet as possible so the members of the commission can hear. Thank you, Mr. Rickman. Dr. Morris, thank you. You and I got to know each other a short time ago. Why don't you tell the commission what your background is? And I'm going to brag on you because you may not do it yourself, but I believe you are managing partner of the largest gastroenterology practice in the country. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. In case you were too modest to say that, I want to make sure the members know that. So fire away.
Well, thank you. Representative Peak, members of the commission. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Stephen Morris, and I am a practicing clinical gastroenterologist. I went to medical school at the State University of New York in Buffalo, where I actually had the opportunity to work in the lab of Sir John Eccles, who won the Nobel Prize for his pioneering groundbreaking research in neurosynaptic work, which you've heard of a lot in the last two presentations. I'm the founding partner and managing member of Atlantic Gastroenterology Associates. We have offices throughout the greater Atlanta and Athens area, as well as extending to Douglasville, Blue Ridge, Conyers, and Griffin. We have 82 physicians, 30 physician assistants and nurse practitioners, and 600 employees. With the passage of the medical cannabis law in Georgia and the fact that we treat about 3,000 patients with Crohn's disease, the work of this commission is of great importance to myself and to my colleagues. So there are two issues that I would like to address to you today. First of all, as a clinician, I would like to talk about Crohn's disease and the role of medical cannabis as a therapeutic agent in the care of these patients. Second, both as a physician, a citizen, a father, and a grandfather of 3, soon to be 4, I would like to talk to you about my opinion about the use and regulation of medical cannabis in Georgia. First, Crohn's disease. I know Dr. Murphy, one of the esteemed members of your commission and a colleague of mine from Savannah, is a gastroenterologist and could tell you a great deal about this disorder. It is a chronic illness. It affects children, adolescents, and adults, and is characterized by inflammation of the small and large intestine. There is no cure for this disease, and it is managed by a combination of medical therapy and surgery when necessary. Our goal in the care of these patients is to allow them to lead normal lives, and fortunately, that is most often the case. Newer medications called biologics, as well as the older medications, have helped us control symptoms in a large number of patients and improve the quality of life in many others. However, there are patients who have had multiple surgeries and failed many different medical regimens. These patients can have chronic pain, weight loss, and inability to eat. The pain can result in dependency and even addiction to pain-relieving medication. The weight loss, unfortunately, can make these patients more susceptible to life-threatening infections. This is multiplied by the fact that they are often on medications that lower their immune system and ability to fight off these infections. So the question for us as gastroenterologists is, can medical cannabis help these patients? Despite the fact that cannabis has been very effective in cell lines in in vitro studies in mitigating or preventing inflammation, we do not have any substantive medical research or controlled clinical trials demonstrating the ability to treat Crohn's disease and induce remission or prevent relapse in patients. Further work clearly needs to be done in this area. We do a great deal of work in my practice in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, the two main types of inflammatory bowel disease, but obviously the legal climate has chilled studies over the years using cannabis in Crohn's disease, and that has been referred to in the previous studies, in the previous talks. However, we know from extensive work, as has been alluded to previously in cancer patients, that medical cannabis has great benefit in reducing pain, increasing appetite, and reducing nausea. These benefits will be of great help in caring for those patients with Crohn's disease that have failed medical therapy. If we can prevent pain, medication dependency, and addiction, we can significantly help a subset of our Crohn's disease patients. Improving appetite and weight may also be beneficial in allowing other medicines to work better and therefore have synergistic effects. As gastroenterologists, we are very thankful to Representative Peak and his colleagues in the State House for giving us an additional tool to help treat these patients. We look forward, depending upon the regulation, to be able to obtain cannabis to treat our patients on an ongoing basis. That turns to the issue of regulation. How we feel medical cannabis as a physician should be regulated in Georgia. I spend a lot of time in Oregon since one of my daughters is a midwife there. And Oregon recently passed legislation, as you know, allowing both medicinal and recreational use of marijuana. In Bend, Oregon, which I visited last summer, there are approximately 80,000 people and 20 dispensaries for medical marijuana. In Portland, the number is rising into 200. Contrast that with Israel, which has about 8 million people and the most advanced research in the medical use of cannabis. The National Institute of Health has been funding ongoing research with Dr. Mechulam in Israel for approximately 40 years. In Israel, there are about 18,000 registered users, the most common illnesses being cancer, chronic pain, childhood epilepsy, gastrointestinal disease such as Crohn's, and recently post-traumatic stress syndrome. Every patient who gets medical cannabis must be approved by a national medical board. They give out limited cultivating and dispensary licenses for the country. Obviously, Oregon and Israel are the polar opposites of the regulatory spectrum. What about in the United States in addition to closer to Georgia? In Minnesota, I have many colleagues that work there in the gastroenterology space. They have a population of about 5.5 million people, and the recent medical marijuana law greatly mirrors the Georgia law. About 9 medical conditions were approved to be treated, and they allowed for 8 distribution centers. Physicians must certify that the patient has one of the 9 conditions, and the State Department of Health must grant approval. However, Minnesota has run into a lot of problems rather rapidly in one of the areas that I think is important for us to consider. They have developed what I would call the doc-in-a-box approach to marijuana. Companies like MarijuanaDoctors.com and Green Rush Consulting have rushed into the state and set up clinics where patients can be seen by a physician with no previous knowledge of their medical condition and for a consultation fee that varies between $70 and $500 can be immediately certified the same day to receive medical marijuana. These entities even advertise that no medical records are necessary. I believe these clinics mark patients that are anxious and are trying to skirt the law as easy prey, and Minnesota has already, in the first year, had to suspend multiple licenses and ventures. I believe our intent in Georgia is to have a highly compassionate but regulated structure that will allow patients that are truly good candidates for medical cannabis to obtain it. It should allow and encourage physicians that feel their patients would benefit to be able to approve the certification, write the prescription when dispensaries are available, and follow their patients. I think it is critical that the primary or treating doctor, whether he or she be an internist, family practitioner, pediatrician, or a specialist, such as a neurologist, oncologist, or gastroenterologist, be the one, when appropriate, that initiates the certification and continues to care for the patient. It certainly may require, as has been alluded to, some education among physicians, but all new therapy usually does. If the newer therapies prove beneficial, then they are usually adopted over time, and some quite rapidly. The medical cannabis law is an important step for patients, and it must be applied within the framework of the medical system. This will allow patients to be better cared for, and also observational studies as well as clinical studies that can be done, which will better guide us to future use and efficacy. I fear if physicians feel the law is being used to turn quick profits without regard to patient well-being, it will taint the therapy and never allow it to take its place as a potentially important therapeutic tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. I think you touched a little bit on what Senator Underman was kind of addressing earlier.
Yes.
That kind of, you got any thoughts on that? Or?
I was just wondering if I could get a copy of this speech.
Yeah, if you would provide that to me electronically, your
I'll be glad to.
your comments, we'll make sure we get that to the entire committee. Any questions from members of the committee? I have one, and it maybe kind of go to Dr. Wetmore as well too, related to cancer in particular. I know we have THC limits in our bill now. That was just the give and take of the legislative process. Is that something we need to look at, do you think, to find some efficacy for Crohn's disease patients, for cancer patients? I'd be interested in just your opinion on that.
Well, it might be worth looking at the data, the evidence. One thing is that if, for example, if I'm running a clinical study that's FDA approved, that study, it doesn't matter what the law is. So I could do a study with 10%
Higher level of THC.
Higher level, as long as it's FDA approved and it's in a clinical study. Now, I think as far as the law goes, I think it's good to look at the data. I think this is a start, and I think looking at the data will help. Perhaps you want to relax that, but
Okay.
Yeah,
You got any thoughts on that,
You know,
Dr. Marsh?
one of the things we do even after drugs are approved is we run further phase studies, phase 4 and phase 5, to adjust dosage and find out which doses are the best, and sometimes which doses work better with other medications. So I agree, it's an ongoing process. Once you get past the initial legal hurdles, then the door is open to very good studies.
Have you had many patients come to your practice?
Well, obviously, one of the reasons I contacted you was that, this became an immediately important issue when the law passed. We, having 3,000 plus patients with Crohn's disease, we received a large number of emails, calls, and we're perplexed how to deal with it. We've already certified a number of patients. We made all our physicians aware of the process, which is really relatively simple. It's a little paperwork.
Right.
But then the problem becomes
Access.
Exact access.
Right.
And so, we that's
What
why
have you
I
been telling your
contacted
patients?
you.
What have you been telling your patients?
That is an ongoing process that we will be glad to certify them at this point in time, but we do not have any other information than they have on how to obtain the drug.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sure. You're 22.
Do you have patients that are coming back to you that you're taking care of in your practice that are ordering it on the internet?
Not that I know of.
You haven't had any to say that they're getting it?
We've had a few that obviously have gone to Colorado and other of the states where it's available and tell us stories anecdotally about how it helps them. Yes. We try not to put that in the medical record.
Dr. Morse, we certified Crohn's disease as a diagnosis in our legislation.
Yes.
There's I'm going to butcher the name of it. You have to what's the other companion to Crohn's disease?
Inflammatory, ulcerative colitis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that something we need to look at from a standpoint of
I think
including that as a qualifying condition as well, too?
Yeah, they're very similar diseases. The difference with ulcerative colitis is it can be cured by a total colectomy, so removing the colon and having the ostomy, which people are probably familiar with. There is no cure for Crohn's disease, and so therefore it tends to result in more problems with chronic pain medication, and we have a higher morbidity rate with Crohn's disease. But certainly we have patients with ulcerative colitis that end up in the same fix. They do not want to have a colectomy, and they live with the disease chronically, and they have the same problems as our patients with Crohn's disease.
For that patient, it maybe would be,
yes, absolutely.
We may need to look at including that.
Right.
And Crohn's disease, that term would not cover that other diagnosis, in your opinion. Right. Okay. Dr. Morse, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Hang on, we got one more question. Dr. Reese, is that you?
Actually, it's not a question directed to you. It's just an additional comment to something that Dr. Morris said, is actually pharmacists are also getting questions about this as far as, patients asking where do I get this now that I know there's a process that for the possession of it, how do I get that? So just to know that other folks in the medical community are also getting questions. So it goes to show again what Dr. Morris said, that it's, access is a barrier at this point.
And I agree with you, and I'm sure it's been discussed or will be discussed that, the eventual use of the drug in the community, use of the dispensaries, this will be a collaborative effort. I think physicians, pharmacists are becoming much more involved when we write everyday medication looking for side effects. And so a lot of this will be collaborative down the road, I'm sure.
Dr. Morse, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. I think that's an appropriate way to show that why what we're doing here is so important. Access is still an issue and a barrier for a lot of our citizens, and it's imperative to us that we come up with a solution. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing all of you at our October 28th meeting. We'll send out details about that, and thank you for making time to be here. Appreciate it.